Over the last few years, EA have stated that they want to get more involved with esports and competitive gaming. They've had successes, no doubt, with their sports titles, but in terms of first-person shooters, nothing from EA seems to be sticking. Why is that? Well, what would you say if DICE and EA came out tomorrow and said, "Hey guys, we're working on a small 5v5 Frostbite engine game along the lines of Rainbow Six Siege"? Just imagine that for a second. Bearing in mind, even if they were, we would never know about it until the time was right, but I think it could be a really interesting prospect if they did, and it's something that I wanted to discuss in this video. Now, I'm not talking about a Battlefield game either. I'm talking about a completely separate IP that perhaps DICE could build, and it would use some of the better features of the Frostbite engine and features from games such as Battlefield, like Destruction for example, but put into a much smaller separate game, much like what Rainbow Six Siege offers up. Now, I honestly think that Rainbow Six Siege has done an incredible job over the past few years in the small-scale competitive first-person shooter market. They've kept players interested and involved with their game, and there is an incredible amount of depth in there for players to learn. It's very similar to CSGO in that respect. Easy to learn the basics, but incredibly hard to master. There are so many maps that you need to learn, and then you have to know all of the abilities of the operators so you can not only use them yourself, but also know what enemies are capable of. And then certain operators are going to be better in different circumstances depending on where you choose to defend. Not only that, there are then further strategies trying to work out what operators enemy players might choose to go with and try to combat them. You've got certain map setups where players might reinforce a particular wall, or then put a sneaky peek hole right next to it, or you could peek into spawn from certain windows. There is a daunting level of information you need to digest in Siege to be good, and that's really important. I would say it's also what keeps a lot of players coming back. The core game may be incredibly simple, but there's just a vast level to it that takes a long time to master, and players do tend to enjoy that. In the last couple of months or so, I've noticed a lot of ex-competitive Battlefield players making the move over to Rainbow Six Siege with their old teammates, and with there being nothing really on the horizon for Battlefield, who can blame them? And they find Siege rewarding because of that learning curve, and in that game, while aiming is of course important, there's an entirely secondary level of skill that's required to play it successfully. And I've thought about this for a while now, especially when the topic of competitive play comes up again. Rainbow Six Siege never started life as a competitive game in that respect, but over time it developed, and the players and the developers began to see and make opportunities for that game. It never started life in that way though, but now it's got a thriving competitive scene on console and PC, and the game is also very competitive online too. It offers up skill-based matchmaking, and players are striving to get the highest rank that they can. Now, I'm not suggesting that DICE or EA or any other company for that matter can just copy Rainbow Six Siege, because there'd be some problems there, wouldn't there? Although there are some serious clones of the game in the Asian markets, which seems to happen with any popular game. That being said, I think you can look at the formula that Siege have done and create something with your own twist, and I think that EA and DICE especially are definitely missing out on the possibility of a fantastic small-scale Frostbite game that has no association or expectation from any of their current IPs, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some new IPs soon. Because if you think about it, at the moment, apart from Battlefield and Titanfall, what other first-person shooter games does EA have in their portfolio? There really isn't any. Battlefield is known for being a massive large-scale game with sprawling maps and a mixture of infantry and vehicle combat. Titanfall, on the other hand, is something different entirely. A futuristic game where players not only fight as infantry with incredibly fluid movement abilities, but they can also call in a heavily armoured Titan to fight in. EA doesn't have anything in their portfolio, anymore at least, that's a small scale 5v5 or 6v6 game on small maps. Why not? I think it could work quite well. Dare I say they bring the Medal of Honor franchise back, but perhaps the bridges have been burnt too much with that one. Now, in BF3, I used to play in competitions and even attend LAN events in the UK. The competitive scene was pretty healthy back then, and even if the overall community wasn't fully aware of it, there was always something going on. Casters had to use the MAV as a way of spectating games, and the level of effort that players would go to ensure that a competitive scene survived was really impressive. In BF4, with the thanks to a spectator mode and proper tournaments like ESL 1, the Battlefield competitive scene made a huge move forwards in my opinion. Teams from around the world competed for the top prize. Even still though, the mode of choice at the beginning was domination, and it just really wasn't very entertaining to watch. It changed later on to obliteration, but I found that even if you played competitive yourself and you had a good understanding of what was going on, it just wasn't that fun or that easy to follow. And then of course with BF1 we had Incursions, but before Incursions was released we didn't even have RSP, the rent-a-server program. This was a huge step backwards, but RSP did eventually come, and DICE worked hard to put Incursions forward as their new competitive mode. Was this finally the step that we needed? Well, DICE putting together a team to properly work towards a comp game mode was seen as a positive thing by a lot of the community. Sadly, it really didn't work out all that well. I think a combination of a confusing game mode, perhaps a lack of true direction, overcomplicating things, and a real lack of players that were interested meant that it really never progressed too far. And then fast forward to today, Battlefield 5, what's even going to happen with that? Are we ever going to see Incursions 2.0? Well, that remains to be seen really. What we do know is that without RSP, Incursions 2.0 might never even exist, and right now we've got no information on RSP, if it will come at all, apart from the statement last week that DICE haven't really made a decision on it yet. Of course, Squad Conquest was introduced recently, and that gave you a taste of what a smaller scale Battlefield game might be like. But that's not what I'm talking about here, and the problem with competitive in Battlefield games is that a lot of people just think it's not a competitive game, and it shouldn't and never will have a successful competitive element. They see it as more of a casual, accessible game, and with the combination of infantry and vehicle combat, large scale maps, lots of players, it seems odd to a lot of people to have an infantry only mode, for example, as a competitive element. Of course, Incursions tried to combat this by allowing one vehicle or tank per team, but I just feel like Battlefield has moved in a different direction over the years, and it's become way more of a mainstream title than it used to be back when some of us were playing BF 1942 or BF2. Times have changed, and if you were EA, then I think you would want the game to cater for the most amount of people possible. RSP, yeah, it would be an incredible addition to the game. Communities would really benefit from it. I talked about it in my video a couple days ago, as would content creators and of course competitive players, but perhaps that's not something we'll ever see in BF5. That's why I think a dedicated game that's not related to Battlefield but still built on Frostbite and DICE could be an alternative for a competitive close quarters infantry game. Maybe that would be the best plan for EA and DICE going forward. If they want to get away from the Battlefield stigma of, oh, it's Battlefield, it's never going to be competitive, then just instead build a standalone game on the Frostbite engine that isn't connected to Battlefield and catered specifically for that small scale gameplay. Perhaps it's time for them to just give up on Incursions and competitive Battlefield entirely and just move on, something new. And I've dreamt of ideas in my head, and I think that this would have no limitations when it came to weapons or environments. Siege, for example, has operators from all sorts of armies and countries, and with that it's got all sorts of weapons and gadgets. Of course, games like CSGO offer up a far more simpler game, but I'm not sure if CSGO came out today that it would be as popular. When CS first released, there was simply nothing else like it, and it's survived this long because of its history and its legacy, and it was just such a simple competitive esports game. And the thoughts of many share that Counter-Strike is just the pinnacle game to show off FPS skill and teamwork, but I think that if a new game was to hit the market today, it's got to offer up something unique to grab people's attention. You've got to be better than Counter-Strike, you've got to be better than Siege. Of course, one of the benefits of having such a varied game with many weapons and operators from various countries is that you can offer up tons of cosmetic items, from which I've absolutely no doubt that Ubisoft make a ton of money. Not only that, but you can get smaller cosmetic items like charms for your weapon, and they add an extra level of personalization. So imagine this, you're playing this dreamed up Frostbite game and you're able to have a Mirror's Edge charm on your weapon, or a popular Battlefield 5 weapon skin, perhaps a World War II soldier's outfit for one of the player's characters. Just small nods to other EA games. Rainbow Six tends to do that very well too by offering up small crossovers with other Ubisoft titles. Wrapping things up, obviously it's okay to dream and wonder about what games could be, and I think there is a case for leaving Battlefield as this open, crazy sandbox game with 64 players that players just hop on and enjoy without it needing or having a competitive element. So why don't DICE and EA just have an entirely separate experience, completely sectioned off from Battlefield or even Titanfall, and offer up something very different to consumers? I for one would love to see how something like that turned out. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. What do you think of a game idea like this? Throw your ideas into the mix. And with that said, I'm going to leave you there. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.